events that we come across any towards the core continent.
Well, I would say that looking at the anthropological literature and the archaeological evidence and the oral histories, what you're saying is largely true. But I think if you look in the southeastern portions of what are now California, you're going to find warrior societies, and you'll find more conflict in those areas.
Go ahead.
I would just add that there is also you may make the argument that California was very exceptional, but if you look more broadly into the continent, you will have plenty of evidence. In other words, for me, it is very hard so I study what I call the other slavery, captivity and enslavement. And when you look at that, you begin to see how futile it is to divide people into good people and bad people. Everybody who was in a position to benefit from this did it, whether it was Native Americans or Spaniards or Americans or Mexicans. There are some groups, indigenous groups, who didn't do it because of environmental constraints or because it didn't make any sense to add more mouths to feed by capturing people and enslaving them. But basically what we're talking about is human nature, and there is plenty of evidence before contact and after contact about these activities going on.
In my totally objective, unbiased opinion, yes, I think there was less, I wouldn't call it warfare. There was obviously conflict, because I agree, we're human just like anybody else, and our ancestors are human, and there's going to be conflict. I think in California, the communities were smaller, so they didn't naturally lead to large-scale warfare. The communities stayed small because there were so many resources in every part of California, for the most part, that they didn't need to worry about their meals and taking resources from somewhere else, which I think is a large part of conflict. I like to think, too, there was a spiritual aspect to it, because conflict had deep ethical, moral constructs of how to deal with conflict in a respectful way. So that's not, in every instance, but I think for the most part, the communities that I know of have ancient traditions that talk about how to respectfully deal with your neighbors. And of course, if you have large-scale warfare, you're going to have to, unless one side is wiped out, which almost never happened in California that I know of, you're going to have to continue living with them, so you don't want to get them too mad. So tradition tended to give us ways that we needed to resolve conflict in a peaceful way.
They covered it all.
Yes.
Great. You were in school in the 50s, correct?
60s.
Okay. What behavior on the part of your fellow students gave you that indication that the racism was very active? Yeah, you'd mentioned.
Away from the speaker.
Hi there. You'd mentioned the feedback you were getting of other students you were concerned about. You went to your father, he said you're lucky you didn't they can't kill you. What was that behavior on the part of your classmates?
I wasn't referring to classmates. What I was saying is that the school lesson, the curriculum, talked about that the natives were already all gone. And so I grew up in the east side of San Jose, which is largely Hispanic. There were very few native people there. But my parents grew up in Salinas, where the north end of Salinas, a little place called Santa Rita, they were mostly natives. And so everybody knew everybody. They were all related to each other in some form or fashion, or from one of the local tribal groups. So they grew up in a very different time. When my dad, after he served in World War II, moved to San Jose, and that's where I was born and raised, and I'm still there.
there was very little native presence until the 1950s and 60s, and they were all relocated natives from other parts of the country that came in. And I wrote about one time in a magazine just recently my experience of in the 70s when I went to talk with them. They grew up in the same school system that taught them California Indians were all dead. So when I gave them my tribal name, they had no idea who I was. They said, well, there's no California Indians. So that's, I guess, a form of passive violence, I guess, eradicating me. But like my dad, I said, my dad told me, he was like, if they think you're dead, they're not going to try to kill you.
If you can get up and
call on.
Why don't we just turn the mic off?
Projector? Yeah, do you want to just project? You're going to be too close.
My question is for Professor Madley. So California is a public law 280 state. Public law 280 grants the states that choose to opt into this program criminal jurisdiction over Indian on Indian crime in Indian country. Do you think that public law 280 is, or would be like a contemporary I don't know, data point in your trajectory of carceral systems in California?
Well, I wrote a piece for the Los Angeles Times last year about it being time to acknowledge genocide in California. One of the points that I made was about PL 280 and suggesting that one of the ways in which California could make reparations to the indigenous people of this state would be by allowing them voluntarily to opt out of PL 280 to have their own criminal jurisdiction. The editors, in their wisdom, decided not to include that because they thought it was too complicated for the average reader to understand. But what I would say about PL 280 that's important is that if there's a change on PL 280 here or in any other PL 280 state, it needs to allow for tribal nations to voluntarily choose whether or not they want to opt in or opt out. Why? Because criminal cases are extremely expensive to prosecute, and many California Indian communities may not want to spend their financial resources on law enforcement and on criminal prosecution. I do think that this is part of the slow chipping away at indigenous sovereignty in the evolution of federal Indian law, and it's just one of many, many instances that we could talk about. I mean, Winter Fox knows because he was my student at Dartmouth, so this is partly a rhetorical question, I think. But it's part of that longer process of slowly diminishing the original sovereignty that's granted in the foundational documents of this country and in colonial era relations with indigenous peoples.
Maybe without a microphone, sorry. Could you tell us what we can do to change the school curriculum in California? I think you started mentioning it.
Michelle and I are part of a coalition that's based out at the moment. It's a kind of an ad hoc, fly-by-seat-of-our-pants coalition. We're all volunteers of academics and Native people. It's based out of CSU Sacramento, and I can rattle off the website. See, www.csus.edu/COE, which is College of Education, /CIC, California Indian Curriculum. And you'll CIC. And on the website, you'll see we're still putting it together, so it's pretty raw. But one of the things we're doing, and that we think kind of talk about it, although Michelle's talk kind of alluded to it, is the sanitizing of our history and the curriculum. And I was just telling her, I'm rereading one of her papers she did a couple years ago that talks about that process, that how it's reflected in the textbooks. You don't hear any of this. That's why I talked about, people are still being taught we're not around, or we're kind of, it faded into the background. We just can't get into the textbooks. The curriculum was reformatted, I guess you could say, last year, and at the state level, and it allows for curriculum. It didn't create the curriculum, but it allows for the curriculum that's much more balanced. And the first thing that they suggested is no more sugar cube or popsicle stick missions. That doesn't teach you anything. Hey, I had to do popsicle sticks. Although it was a great summer before that, but to collect, well, we had to get our own popsicle sticks. But the making of it doesn't teach you anything. And I kind of done my own informal survey, and nobody really enjoyed it or really got anything out of it. And so that's trying to be done away with. What I feel, and one reason I started the coalition and stirred up that part of it, was to bypass the system. And we can do that now. I think a lot of things are coming together, especially with the internet. We now have the ability to create curriculum and distribute it easily, quickly, and free. And that's what we're trying to do. There's 8 curriculum from different parts of the state, and the intent, right from the beginning, was for Native people to either create the curriculum or be involved in consultation with it, because it's a skill that not all communities have. Curriculum has been done in the past, but it's been dismissed because it didn't meet standards. It's nice, it's very informative, thank you very much, but it didn't meet state standards, and people were afraid or just didn't want to use it, or use that as an excuse not to use it. Most of the things that we put on there are being vetted by academics and Native people, so the information is valid and it meets the state standards. So that eliminates several key excuses for not using it. And of course, it's meant to be local. So the idea in the future is that we grow this idea, helping communities, Native communities, get the resources to create their own curriculum. And it's a very different, and it doesn't, most of them do not focus on this tiny little bit of the last 500 years. Because we've been here 15,000 years, 20,000 years since the beginning of time. And that's what we talk about, what that means to us. We talk about culture, we talk about the landscape. You know, our stories, most of the stories in California talk about this is what we're made of. This is a clapper stick made from elderberry bush. And in the stories of my dad, this is what humans are made of, elderberry. So we were made from the very land itself, and we're very connected to it, intimately bonded to it. And that's the story we really want to tell. You're going to get all the factoids about the last couple of 100 years along with it, and that's an important part of the story, but it's only a small part of the story, and that's the goal of coalition.
Is there a local perspective?
There is a local perspective for the Ohlone people from the East Bay. The East Bay Regional Park District did that in consultation with the Native community, the Ohlone community, and the Bay Miwoks and Yokuts, I think. And it's free, available on their website. It's also on, a link is on the website I just gave at CSU Sacramento. So for the local area, for those interested, you can download it. Don't use dial-up because it's a big honking file, but it's a big thick thing. I left it in the car, but it's a story of a people that only contains a little bit of this part and much more besides that.
I'm actually going to have to close questions, and I apologize for that, but everyone can speak to all the speakers at the table. There's also going to be signing at the table in the front, and there's snacks. So, they're all amazing.
Just one more question, or not a question, but a statement. I'd like to talk to all 4 of you because I've come across information.
Well, you can certainly do that at the...
That there are bones at the Mission Soledad in walls, not on the ground. We have pictures of that. So I'd like to talk to you.
Anyway, thank you so much. If you have any thoughts or questions, please direct them to me and only me.
Oh!